What if surviving a 30 degrees Celsius winter had nothing to do with making more heat and everything to do with never letting it escape? Across the frozen plains of North America, winter can become a silent predator. Temperatures plunge, winds cut across endless snowfields. By modern standards, survival here should be nearly impossible. Yet for thousands of years, indigenous peoples didn't just endure these winters, they mastered them. Without central heating, without modern insulation, sometimes even without firewood, their secret was not brute force against nature, but a deep understanding of its laws. And once you see how they did it, you may realize that some of the most ingenious winter engineering in human history was created long before the modern world. Most modern societies fight winter with more heat, bigger heaters, more fuel, thicker walls. Indigenous peoples of North America took a very different approach. Instead of producing endless heat, they focused on something far more powerful, keeping the heat they already had. Their strategy followed a simple law of physics. The most effective insulator on Earth isn't stone, wool, or wood. It's air. When air is trapped and kept still, it becomes a powerful barrier against the cold. Modern insulation works on exactly this principle. But long before modern science explained it, indigenous communities had already mastered it. Their homes, clothing, and even village design were built to trap warm air and prevent heat from escaping. And some of the materials they used might surprise you. Because one of their most effective insulators grew quietly along the edges of rivers and wetlands. One of the most remarkable materials used for winter survival was cattail fluff. Cattails grow along lakes and wetlands across North America. In late autumn, their seed heads burst open into clouds of soft fibers that drift through the air like cotton. But this delicate fluff hides a powerful secret. Each fiber traps tiny pockets of still air, creating an incredibly effective natural insulator. Packed inside clothing or footwear, cattail down forms a lightweight shield against the cold. Indigenous communities gathered this material and used it to line winter garments and boots. The result was insulation that was astonishingly warm, yet almost weightless. Dry grasses and moss worked in similar ways. Their hollow stems created thousands of microscopic air chambers. When layered inside bedding, clothing, or shelter walls, they slowed heat loss and blocked the movement of cold air. These materials required no factories, no complex tools, only knowledge. And in the harsh winters of North America, knowledge of the land was the most powerful technology of all. But insulation alone could not defeat winter. To truly survive the cold, shelter itself had to become a carefully engineered system. To modernize, the teepee can appear almost primitive. A circle of wooden poles, animal hides stretched over them, a small fire inside. But this deceptively simple structure was one of the most efficient winter shelters ever designed for life on the open plains. Its strength began with its shape. The cone allowed powerful winds to glide smoothly around the shelter instead of crashing into flat walls. Even violent prairie storms often flowed past it with surprising ease. But the real innovation lay inside. A second inner lining of hides hung along the walls, leaving a narrow gap between the outer covering and the living space. This gap created a natural airflow system. Cold air, entering beneath the outer edge, didn't rush into the shelter. Instead, it rose between the two layers of hide, gradually warming as it mixed with heat from the fire. Smoke escaped through an adjustable opening at the top, guided by movable flaps that could shift with the wind. The result was a remarkably balanced system of warmth, airflow, and ventilation. The teepee functioned less like a simple tent and more like a carefully engineered thermal machine. But the peoples of the Great Plains were not the only masters of winter shelter. Farther east, another culture developed a structure based on an entirely different principle. In the forests of northeastern North America, winter could be just as unforgiving. Snowstorms buried the land, and temperatures often fell below 30 degrees Celsius. Here, indigenous communities developed one of the most remarkable winter shelters in North American history. The longhouse. These wooden structures could stretch more than 60 meters in length. They were not simply homes. They were entire communities under a single roof. Dozens of families, sometimes over 100 people, lived together inside one long building. The frame was built from young, flexible trees bent into wide arches, forming a tunnel-shaped structure strong enough to carry heavy snow. Sheets of bark layered over the frame created durable, weatherproof walls. Inside, the longhouse functioned like a carefully balanced thermal system. Hearth fires burned along a central corridor, spaced throughout the building. Warm air rose toward the high roof, while sleeping platforms were raised above the cold ground. Higher sleeping spaces meant warmer air. But in the longhouse, the greatest source of warmth was not the fires themselves. It was the people living together inside. Every human body produces heat. A resting adult generates roughly 100 watts of thermal energy. Inside a longhouse filled with 100 people, that meant nearly 10,000 watts of heat constantly warming the interior. Together with the hearth fires, this biological warmth helped stabilize the indoor climate. In many ways, the longhouse functioned as a living heating system. Food stores, corn, beans, dried meat, and firewood were kept inside as well. These supplies acted as thermal mass, absorbing warmth during the day and slowly releasing it as temperatures dropped at night. Nothing was accidental. Every element followed the same guiding principle: never waste heat. Even clothing was designed with this idea in mind. And the cold weather clothing systems developed by indigenous cultures would later reflect principles now used in modern winter gear. Today, survival experts recommend layered clothing, but this principle was mastered centuries earlier. Instead of relying on a single heavy garment, indigenous clothing systems used multiple layers, each designed to trap warm air. The innermost layer, worn against the skin, was often made from soft deer or antelope hide. When carefully tanned, it became flexible like fabric and absorbed moisture from the body, helping prevent sweat from freezing. A second, looser layer created additional pockets of insulating air. The outer layer was often made from bison hide, worn with the thick fur facing inward. The fur trapped heat, while the leather exterior blocked the wind. Footwear followed the same logic. Winter moccasins were made slightly larger than the foot, leaving space for insulating materials such as dry grass, fur, or cattail fibers. Even mittens were designed for efficiency. By keeping fingers together instead of separated like gloves, they reduced heat loss dramatically. Yet clothing alone was not always enough. On the vast open plains, another challenge appeared. Sometimes there were no trees at all, which raised a critical question. Where did the fire come from? The Great Plains were once home to vast herds of bison, millions of animals moving across endless grasslands. They provided food, clothing, and shelter materials. But they also provided something equally vital: fuel. When dried by sun and wind, bison dung becomes an effective fuel known as buffalo chips. It burns slowly, evenly, and with very little smoke. For many plains tribes, it was often the only reliable fuel available. Families gathered and dried it throughout the year, storing it carefully for winter. A small pile could keep a fire burning for hours. To outsiders, the idea might seem unpleasant, but the smoke carried a scent closer to dry grass or peat. For those who lived on the plains, it was simply the smell of home. And without it, surviving winter in a treeless landscape might have been impossible. Yet even fire was only one part of the larger system. Sometimes, the greatest ally against the cold came from the very thing people feared most: snow. To those unfamiliar with winter survival, snow seems like the ultimate enemy of warmth. But snow holds something surprisingly valuable: air. Fresh snow can be nearly 90% air, making it an excellent natural insulator. Indigenous communities understood this well. Snow was often piled around the base of homes to seal gaps and block the wind, forming natural insulating walls. The deeper the drift, the warmer the shelter could remain. In some regions, people built semi-underground winter shelters. Earth was dug out, wooden frames were raised, and thick layers of soil and snow were piled above. Inside these structures, temperatures could remain near freezing, even when the outside air dropped to 30 degrees Celsius. The earth provided insulation. The snow sealed the shelter. Nature supplied the materials. Human knowledge turned them into protection. But surviving winter required more than strong shelters. It depended on how people lived inside them. Inside winter shelters, organization was just as important as construction. Sleeping areas were raised slightly above the ground, avoiding the colder air that settled near the floor. Beds were built in layers. First came spruce branches or dry grass, forming an insulating base. On top of that were thick animal hides, followed by soft furs used as blankets. People often slept close together, sharing body heat through the long winter nights. Sometimes stones heated in the fire were wrapped in hides and placed near bedding, releasing warmth slowly until morning. Food played an equally vital role. Winter diets were rich in fat and protein. One of the most famous foods was pemmican, a dense mixture of dried meat, rendered fat, and sometimes berries. Lightweight, long-lasting, and extremely energy-rich, it provided the calories the body needed to generate heat. Shelter, clothing, food, and community all worked together as a single survival system. But perhaps the most powerful tool against winter was something less visible: a mindset. For many indigenous cultures, winter was not an enemy. It was simply part of the natural rhythm of life. Summer was a season of movement, hunting, traveling, and gathering resources. Winter became a time for something different: storytelling, tool-making, teaching the next generation. Long nights around the fire strengthened community bonds, while elders passed knowledge to younger hands. Survival skills were not learned in a single season, but over many winters. This deep relationship with the land ensured that resources were rarely exhausted. People took what they needed, seldom more. Their survival system was not built on conquering nature. It was built on working with it. And through that understanding, entire societies flourished in environments that modern civilization still struggles to master. The survival of indigenous peoples through North America's harshest winters was never the result of a single invention. It was a system. Shelter, clothing, food, fuel, and community all worked together, shaped by generations of careful observation and experience. Long before modern science explained the physics of heat, these societies already understood how to work with it. Grass, fur, snow, even animal waste became tools for survival. In a world now facing new environmental challenges, their knowledge feels more relevant than ever. Because sometimes the most advanced solutions are not new technologies. Sometimes they are ancient ideas waiting to be rediscovered. And perhaps the real question is this: which of these forgotten survival principles could still help us today? If you enjoy exploring the hidden knowledge of ancient cultures and the engineering secrets of the past, you're in the right place. Here on Shadows of Valhalla, every story reveals how human ingenuity shaped survival in the harshest landscapes on Earth. And sometimes, the oldest wisdom still holds the greatest power.